I think that Ruby Sapphire should have a resurgence in the metagame, considering that Steel is definitely becoming more common in order to try to combat Ruby Amethyst. As we saw from the online tournament, which was 282 players, there was one Sapphire Steel deck, which is what I'm facing up against here in this matchup, that cut through the field of pretty much every Ruby Amethyst player except for the finals match. And Sapphire Steel is a very versatile deck that can have answers to almost any deck in the metagame thanks to its versatility, its ability to ramp, and its ability to reset tempo with a whole new world. But the Ruby Sapphire deck, I think, is a good counter to anything that is Steel. And as you can see here, being on the draw, the opponent has the advantage, establishes a Fishbone Quill first, undoubtedly playing into a whole new world setup. But we are able to kind of keep pace with them with the Ruby Sapphire deck. And with the Ruby Sapphire deck. And as I mentioned many times before, Ruby has a better top end than Steel does for sure. And as you can see here, my opponent is essentially forced to hardcast that whole new world because when you look at what was in their hand from what the discard was, they had a Hades and a Grab Your Swords, which means if they didn't whole new world there, their turn would just be completely dead, and they would just be hoping to top deck a 5-drop character in order to sing a whole new world. So because of that, we are able to regain tempo here, and the opponent does top deck a Nothing to Hide off of that whole new world, which lets them know that I have a Be Prepared in hand. And this is what these matchups come down to, Steel versus Ruby, where both players have extremely powerful songs in the Be Prepared on the Ruby side and the whole new world on the Steel side. And both players have to try their best to play around these cards because they do reset the tempo of the match for the player that can execute them to their advantage. Now, the Be Prepared is slightly more powerful because you can just drop it without needing to sing it, and just resetting the board state in and of itself from there is very, very good. Whereas with a whole new world, yes, if you are able to even hardcast it with an advantage on board, you can still make out okay. But you really, really do, I think, need to sing that in order to get the most advantage off of it. And honestly, on the top end of the game, which is quite common for these, Sapphire, Steel, Sapphire, Ruby matchups, I think Ruby has the better top end because we just have straight up removal, whereas the Steel cards start to become a little bit more underwhelming. So you can see here right now my opponent is looking very, very strong, despite a weak board state, because again, they're trying to play around my Be Prepared that they know I have in hand. I'm also trying not to draw too many cards because I know that they probably drew into another whole new world, and the last thing I want to do is fill up my hand, not be able to dump most of it onto the field because again, I want to get some utility off of these Be Prepared, get some of the opponent's threats off the board, and I have to be very careful with how many cards I'm drawing essentially. Now, the other thing to keep note of in this match, which I don't think a lot of people are aware of, and if you've played any Sapphire Ruby or Sapphire Steel decks, you know that decking out is a real concern. And not only decking out is a concern, but making sure that you have enough endgame threats is also a concern. I remember I played a match at Locals where I think I was down to my last 5 cards, but I had no threats to actually quest for game. I had control of the match, but all of my big questers were gone. I didn't even have any 2 questers like the Nick Wild or the Judy Hopps. I just had weenies that couldn't quest for game fast enough before I decked out. And so you have to be very careful of that in both of these matchups here. And so keeping things like the Bell on the Sapphire Steel side, or a Tamatoa or a Tinkerbell, things that are very, good questers, you have to be very, very aware of that fact as well. On the Ruby Sapphire side, you have the Maleficents, the Lady Tremaines, the Hades, and the Tamatoas, but you also have Judy Hopps and Nick Wild. Now, the Sapphire Steel build also should have Tragic Hero and Nick Wild to a certain degree if you're playing that variation, but these are all things you have to consider in this matchup. It's a very, very tense match because, again, you can see how we're both trying to play around each other's power cards. I'm trying to not keep my hand too big, and the opponent's trying not to overextend too much. They can afford to a little bit, as you saw me execute one of the Be Prepareds there. And of course, they likely aren't thinking that I have a second one because they're like, okay, good, I finally outed his one Be Prepared. Now I can kind of commit on the board here and see what the opponent wants to do to respond. So with a Hiram and a Prince Eric, and drawing into another Maleficent, I think that it's pretty safe to drop this Maleficent here because a singular Prince Eric isn't a big threat. And I'm like, okay, the opponent still isn't going to hold New World here, so I should be safe. And I do want to get some value off of this second Be Prepared. The opponent does let it go my Maleficent Dragon, and I'm like, that's perfect, because you're not going to be prepared, or you're not going to hold New World here. You're going to extend on the board. And they, again, don't go too wide, but they have 4 cards in hand, and you can tell that they are trying to aggressively dump their hand because they want to hold New World. So at this point, I'm like, let me just out your threats again. I'm going to drop the Be Prepared, and then I'm going to drop a Hiram to draw 2 because I've already inked off of the first Fishbone, I believe, there. And then I just ink a Teeth and Ambitions on this side. What's funny is now the opponent is like, okay, I'm just going to try to get as much value as I possibly can. They smash, dump a Cinderella into the Inkwell, use Fishbone to dump another card, and then once again hard cast a whole New World. So we're doing our best to try to keep the opponent off of their singers. You can see that we Be Prepared the 2 cards in the Prince Eric and the Cogsworth. So not only trying to get value off of the Be Prepared, but also keeping them off their 5 singer for the whole New World. And then this drop of the Cruella here is a very weak end board, and I'm feeling pretty solid here. It is unfortunate that I drew my Dinner Bell so late, but as you can tell in this matchup, the card draw isn't a problem. Because both decks are kind of slow to start up, neither player is really going to run away with the lore, and in the end game, as I've mentioned before, the Ruby package should outshine the Steel package, and you should have the advantage. I was totally expecting to get Let It Go to Hades here, and as I've mentioned again, the Steel package can't deal with big threats like the Tamatoa. They need to rely on the Sapphire cards in the Hades and the Let It Goes. And if you don't have that, well, this Tamatoa is just going to run absolutely rampant on them. So you can see my opponent now commits to a wide board. We do have a Be Prepared in hand, but the Tamatoa is basically going to go untouched here, which is pretty interesting. So we're going to go ahead and drop the Dinner Bell just to get the extra lore off of the Tamatoa quest. We quest for 5, go up to 9, and I take some time to think here, but I end up going for the Poisoned Apple because, again, if they drop a Bell, the Poisoned Apple is going to absolutely shut that down right away. I debate what I want to do here, and I think I just opt to ready up the Tamatoa because the opponent questing for 5 on the other end isn't too threatening. I drop a Nick Wild despite not having a Popsicle because I just want to put a little bit more pressure on the board for questing power. And the opponent now reveals a Hades, which had to have been a top deck, right? Otherwise, they would have definitely Hades the turn before. They're going to go ahead and quest for 5, and at this point, you can see my mouse hovering over the opponent's deck because I'm very much aware of how many cards are left. Am I at threat of being whole New Worlded? And the only thing I have to be wary of here is not going lower on the deck count than my opponent, because as soon as they hit 7, they can't cast the whole New World. At least that's the way Pixelborn was programmed before. But if they do, they would lose the game because they're priority player, and so they would draw first and lose from the deck out. So as long as I have one more card in my deck than my opponent, as soon as we hit 7, I should be fine. I drop the Be Prepared after questing with the Nick Wild, drop a Hiram and a Cruella, and just pass. Again, just putting very small questing pressure on board to see what my opponent wants to do to answer these threats. They're going to go ahead and drop Tinkerbell and drop Bell, and I'm like, okay, this is perfectly fine. I have the Let It Go and the Hades for that, and that is going to be totally a-okay. They go ahead and drop another Cruella as well to just go a little bit wider. But again, we have all of the answers. Not only do we have the Sapphire cards in order to answer the opponent's threats, but we have the Ruby cards as well. And this is exactly what I was talking about. And this is a good matchup if you start to see the Sapphire Steel deck kind of come out as a top meta contender in order to try to combat like Emerald Steel Discard and Ruby Amethyst Control. The Ruby Sapphire deck is a very good matchup for this, in my opinion. It is a grind game, as you can tell. I think we're on like almost 10 minutes worth of gameplay, and I've obviously sped this up and cut out a lot of the wait times. So be prepared to have a long match, no pun intended on the Be Prepared there, but yeah, it is quite a grind fest. The opponent is going to let it go. So again, using up all their removal, they've got like 8 cards left in deck. I've got 10. So exactly what I said earlier, just trying to make sure I have enough cards in deck that I'm not below my opponent to play around the whole New World deck out win strategy. And the opponent is down to 5 cards. They drop a Cogsworth using up the last of their ink, and as you can probably tell, I am dropping that Lady Tremaine with the quickness to out that Cogsworth. And now the opponent is pretty much on like no big threats that I have to worry about here. I think they've gone through all 4 of their Hades. They've probably gone to 2 or 3 Let It Goes. And now my Tamatoa is easily going to put game on board. Once the opponent draws, I think they give me the well played as they realize the game is over. And that's going to be the match. Let's go ahead and take a look at another Steel matchup in Amber Steel Song. All right, in this matchup here, we're going to go ahead and put back some of our duplicate, uninkables, and high-costing cards like the Maleficent. And we're going to start with the ideal setup in a turn 1 Popsicle. Kind of funny, in the last match, I didn't see Popsicle until very late, or my Dinner Bells, which is my card draw. But like I said, it's not a big deal in that matchup because they're going to be resetting everything with a whole new world anyways. Now, again, with the Steel matchups here, you do have to be wary of a whole new world, and I've been seeing this variation of Amber Steel Song pop up a lot more, using the Lilo to get early lore, and then close the game out a little bit quicker with the Flutes later on. So, on turn 2, we're going to go ahead and drop the Cruella, which is going to be kind of forced to be thrown into the Simba. Unfortunately, we don't have anything to use the Teeth and Ambitions with, so that's maybe one flaw of this build, is that my Teeth and Ambitions aren't as useful because I don't have any 1/3s, I don't have any Gramatalas, I don't have any noise in this build, but I think that this build is overall a little bit more resilient into the meta now because you don't really see hyper aggro all that much, and even if you did, you could end up just sacking your Cruellas and anything else to the Teeth and Ambitions in order to deal with those aggro threats, because as soon as you start establishing 5, 6, 7 ink, the Mauis, the Tremaines, the Hades, the Maleficents, the Be Prepared, etc. start coming down and you start controlling the match there. So we're going to go ahead now and establish the Hiram. I have to be very careful of the whole new world though, of course, so I don't want to draw too much. The opponent played Aerial and immediately just hit like escape or something or cancel to not draw any song. Either they didn't see one right away, but given how fast that they declined it, I am anticipating that they just wanted the singer on board and they already have a whole new world in hand. So I'm just going to try to stabilize a little bit because the opponent is on 8 lore, which is quite a lot, and I just want to out some of their threats. So I dropped the Tremaine here. It's kind of unfortunate that I'll likely lose the Hades here, but it's kind of expected. So they dropped a Flute, and they do indeed sing a whole new world with the Aerial. And now I'm facing down Flute pressure because on the 8 lore that the opponent already has established from those Lilos, now the Flutes are putting on that additional pressure where it's very hard to interact with. Thankfully, we do play 3 Judy Hops, and we can out those Flutes. We don't really care too much about giving the opponent the card draw. Getting the Flutes out of rotation is definitely more important. So you can see me here trying to dig for that Judy Hops. I'm going to go ahead and out the opponent's Aerial because I do have a Lady Tremaine to out the Lilo. And I'm just trying to stabilize. Steel will have a problem dealing with a wide board. While they do have the Grab Your Swords, which is probably what they're going to try to utilize in order to out this Tremaine. Nope, they go ahead and do Let the Storm Rage On. That's fine. They can't reliably clear boards, and so it's basically a race for them. They're going to try their best to use Flutes in order to just put enough pressure on you before you can establish your setup and go for game. So again, seeing the opponent on 5 cards, I'm kind of anticipating that they might be on a whole new world here. So we're going to go ahead and drop the Fishbone Quill in order to get some extra value. I do still end up drawing with the Hiram, which is questionable, but I'm less fearful of the deck out in this matchup than I am in the Sapphire Steel, because like I mentioned, the Amber Steel player is likely going to try to race you, whereas the Sapphire Steel player is more likely to try to outgrind you, and as I've already established, the Ruby package will likely outgrind the Steel package, and so deck out is a viable option for the Sapphire Steel player, whereas it's a much less viable option for the Amber Steel player. So the opponent continues to put the pressure on me with these Flutes. They're on 14 lore now, and you can see they know against Sapphire Ruby. It's pointless to try to drop characters in quest because I have removal. I probably have all the removal in my hand. If they end up wheeling to try to get some advantage, I likely just draw into more removal. And so my game plan here now is I'm going to try to race you back and establish my wide board. Force your outs, force your Grab Your Swords and your removal spells. But thankfully we do see a Judy Hops here, which gets rid of one of the Flutes. And the opponent only has 1 left now, which is great. They're going to go ahead and continue to ink. On 3, they're going to drop Aerial. Do they grab anything? No, they don't. They're going to go ahead and end the game, or end their turn, sorry, with the Flute, going into 15 lore. And now this is looking kind of dicey. I'm on a 5-turn clock if the opponent has more songs and no more Flutes. If they have another Flute, I am on an even shorter clock. We're going to Dinner Bell, and it's a little risky here not going for the Judy Hops. I just wanted to prevent them from singing a whole new world here. So that's why I opted to establish a little bit more questing power, or I guess not really questing power because Judy Hops also quest for 2, but just a bigger body in the Maleficent and out the potential to sing the whole new world that they might have in hand with the aerial because I want to keep them low on tempo here as well. But you could argue that outing the Flute was the better choice, because you can see here now they put down a second Flute after wheeling, and the hard cast Flute doesn't really disrupt tempo too much because, again, they're not really putting questing pressure on board. They care more about using Flutes in order to close the game out, and now they are very, very close to doing that. So with the Simba and the double Flutes, we are basically at risk of losing the game here, so I have to drop this Tremaine in order to out the Simba. I don't have a way to out the Flutes, but I'm like, unless the opponent top decks another Flute here, I should win the game off this Tamatoa, because again, Steel can't deal with Tamatoa. It's very, very difficult. So we just go ahead and try to establish a wide array of items. I opt not to draw off the Hiram because I'm at risk of decking out. And right now my opponent has two win conditions. They can either have a whole new world and draw into another whole new world and cast it to deck me out and win the game. As you can see there, I'm on 5 cards. They have 19. Or they draw into a Flute here, which is their last Flute, and win the game that way. They have neither, and we were able to close that out. But you can see how close that matchup ended up being in the end, and that's why you need to play the Judy Hopps. If you made it this far in the video, thank you again for watching. The deck list is linked in the description, and obviously you see it on screen here, but it's also likely pinned in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like. It does help. Thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.